Good afternoon if you are in New York City or Mexico City or places where Maria Callas may have sung in North America. Good evening if you are in Europe, especially in Milan, Italy, where my guest joins me tonight. I'm Fred Plotkin. This is Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. As you know, Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to music lovers all over the world. Today is December 1st, 2023. Tomorrow would be the 100th birthday of Maria Callas, and this is the third in a series of special conversations that I'm holding about the life, the art, and the work of Maria Callas. I picked today's guest, who is in Milan. He's a friend, because I associate Maria Callas, even though I'm a New Yorker and she was born here in New York, most closely with Milan. And so I wanted this particular conversation to happen the closest to Callas's birthday. My guest is Paolo Besana, who is press director of Teatro alla Scala, which is my church when I'm in Italy. That's where I worship. And he has been associated with La Scala for 20 years. He has been press director since 2014, and before that, he was with the Filarmonica della Scala as communications director. And Paolo knows a lot, let's put it that way. And when we talk first about Maria Callas, we will explore Callas's life and career in Milan. But then I want to talk to Paolo about Teatro alla Scala, because the company opens its season every December 7th. So we're about to begin that. And I'm very grateful to you, Paolo, because I know you're very busy in the days right before the opening of La Scala. So welcome to Fred Plotkin on Fridays.
Thank you, Fred.
If my research is correct, Maria Callas sang 23 different roles at Teatro alla Scala. In a period from 1950 to 1961 was when she took on each of the new roles. She did some more than once, but it is a remarkable achievement. And I went back and I listened to many of them, and I was familiar with all of them. There were no surprises to me. But one surprise that came to me that I just didn't expect, she did no Puccini at La Scala.
No, never. Never.
Why?
And I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. What I can say is that I find really astonishing that well, she sang here for 28 times, and on 28 productions, 23 were new roles. This is something really special, and this makes even more strange that she didn't sing, but I must say, in her career, she didn't sing very much Puccini at all. She sang, of course, La Bohème. She sang Turandot.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end,
she was I think,
and Manon Lescaut. But she wasn't that appreciated as a Puccini singer.
No. Also, she famously did
Madame
Butterfly.
For us, it's special. But
right. I was going to say, she famously did Madame Butterfly in Chicago in 1958. The only time in her career that she did it, but it was a very famous occasion because of all the press.
But if you look at the critics, actually, she was really appreciated as Madame Butterfly and as Manon. But many critics had something to say against her Mimi, for instance, because they used to say that the voice was too peculiar, too strong, too manly, maybe. So she wasn't the sweet, delicate young girl who people at the time expected for Mimi. And this is also interesting because she, in a way, she came before before the evolution of the Puccini singing, because at the time people was used to wonderful voices, full of full of just golden sound, like Tebaldi. They were used to more delicate and intimate, an intimate approach, but they were not used to have a Puccini heroine seen as a very strong woman, which of course Callas was. So basically, critics had much to say against, and also the public. They saw her as a tragic heroine, a Greek, a character from a Greek tragedy, and not as an intimate singer, as a sweet young girl, like most of the Puccini roles.
Then I suppose I would ask the critics, Callas was a very famous Violetta. And when I teach Verdi and Puccini to people who don't know or like one or the other, I tend to say that if you like Violetta, you like Mimi, because the qualities are similar. A lot of the vocal coloring is similar in those two operas. And Callas was a very famous Violetta, and no one said she's too strong to sing Violetta. I don't expect you to answer for a critic from 1952, but I wonder why there is that dichotomy.
I think that actually Luchino Visconti was really important for her also in this case. I mean, Visconti chose to make a very realistic Traviata for the time. He moved the sets and costumes from the 1830s to an epoch around the end, between the end of 19th century and Belle Époque. And so he moved the story closer to the time of the public, and he made some very, very strong choices. Mm-hmm. So she was acting in a very realistic way, like a cinema, like in a movie. And then there are these famous gestures that nowadays would be just nothing, just funny. But she, when she's alone after the first party before Forse Lui, she took her shoes off, and this was a scandal. Mm. This was just too realistic for the time, and she did it with a very realistic gesture, just throwing them like somebody who danced all the night and just says, well, I'm so tired and I suffered all the night long because of the shoes. So and the other point, which is really ridiculous for us, but at the time was really a point, was her hat. Because in the last scene, she died and she was preparing to get out. Of course, she wants to get out before she wants to join
the carnival,
to go to go to church.
Yeah.
And so in Puccini's production, in Visconti's production, she wears a hat, and having a lady wearing a hat inside the house was really a scandal in Italy in the 50s.
And why is that?
Because a well-educated lady would wait until the last minute, and she would never wear a hat inside. So Visconti's version was very realistic,
Mm-hmm.
at the point of making a scandal. And but when the audience accepted that, they accepted the whole thing. A
Mm-hmm.
realistic setting and a very realistic singing. If you read the critics, it is strange because what the adjective they use is verista. They
Yep.
accused Visconti and Callas uh, to transform La Traviata in Cavalleria Rusticana.
Uh-huh.
For them, it was just too much reality.
Yeah.
And they used to write that art is just transforming all the sorrows and sufferings of life in singing, in something elegant, something really well, in beauty.
Yeah.
And Callas and Visconti together gave back a completely different account of Violetta's story,
Mm-hmm.
a very strong one.
Yeah. Well, I know
And,
that yes,
and this is the point. This is the answer about why Violetta was fine
Mimi was not.
and Mimi wasn't. Because
Yeah.
in Violetta, well, Callas did basically the same thing. But
Mm-hmm.
in the case of Violetta, she had a director.
Yeah.
In the case of Mimi, no, she was just out of the production. She was
Mm-hmm.
something different.
Um, you're raising a series of very important points. I do want to just acknowledge in passing that Callas's most famous Puccini role was Tosca, which he never did sing at Milan, and I'll always wonder
No,
about that. But the point I want to get into, because you opened the issue so beautifully, is
but she sang it with the Scala Orchestra and the Sabbath.
yes, yes, but not in a
No,
production.
no, not on
Yeah,
stage. But
yeah,
this document is is a great part of our history.
absolutely. Um, Viewers of my program know that I've worked in 40 theaters. The two theaters I feel closest to are the Met and La Scala, both of which I worked at. I did a lot of my training in and near Milan, and I have a very deep, strong affection for Teatro La Scala. It has taught me so much about the world of opera and about audiences, about traditions, about breaking traditions, about the way that Milan audiences feel that they carry with them the culture of the past, the way they bring the weight of the past to the present, the way they will criticize something in front of them because it doesn't compare to 1847 or 1952 or whatever, or even 1978. And therefore, um, it's a very particular phenomenon. Audiences at La Scala have very strong opinions. They have their favorites in terms of artists. They come prepared. They come sometimes prepared already with their opinions even before the curtain rises.
Yeah.
And it's a very particular challenge. And even the greatest artists, and I've witnessed this in the audience at La Scala, have not always met with friendship, let's call it, from the audience. But nonetheless, audiences at La Scala care very deeply about opera. They care very deeply about their theater, what it represents. They will tell you that when Milan was in rubble after World War II, the people got La Scala up and running on May 11th of 1946. Before many other things in the city were working, they got their opera house up and running, and Toscanini conducted and Tebaldi sang. And when you go into Milan, Teatro La Scala is right there in the middle of the city. It's not necessarily the building that captures your eye first. You have to know to look for it. The facade is rather sober. You have added buildings, and we can talk about this, behind that have modernized the theater in 2003 and then very recently. But nonetheless, the facade remains the same. It's a theater that I find has modernized a lot more, and I want to talk to you about this later, a lot more than it ever is given credit for, and is in many ways very modern. And I think this reflects the Milanese attitude toward modernity, progress, and technology. And therefore, it's not the stereotype. I'm going to get one thing out of the way right now. The question I'm asked most about La Scala is, how do I get tickets? And I always reply, the website is really good. It's very accurate. And I often go to the website for other people to help them get tickets because they think it must be impossible to get a ticket to La Scala. You have to prepare, you have to check when things go on sale, but it is actually very easy to buy tickets to La Scala when they are available. So I encourage people to go do that. It's in English as well as Italian. It's excellent. But I guess, Paolo, what I'm wondering is, do opera people today feel the weight of the 1950s as a symbol of a golden age of La Scala? Not just Maria Callas, but so many wonderful conductors. Luchino Visconti as the stage director, and I'd like to talk about him. He was incredibly important to the theater. The other fascinating thing is that Callas made many recordings at that time, but also when you go to the gift shop at La Scala, there are many recordings on sale, not just of Callas, but of everyone from the 1950s, so that the theater obviously recorded a lot of these things, or the national radio recorded them. And it is possible there are treasures in that gift shop, in the little red, white, and gold boxes, of performances, La Fanciulla del West from 1956, all kinds of just wonderful things, not just the famous ones, but less famous, that are really an acoustical archive available to anyone who wants to know how opera sounded then. And I can't think of a comparable theater in the world. Yes, Salzburg and Vienna, and to some degree the Met, there is documentation. The Met, there's radio documentation, excellent radio documentation. But this is very particular. When you go to the Met and Vienna, you don't see those recordings available. At La Scala, you can buy recordings of all of this gold from the 1950s. Does all of that gold weigh on, does it create a burden for now?
Well, of course, it is a burden. I think that what we should consider is that La Scala has, of course, it has a strong tradition, but it has also always been quite an innovative theater, at least for Italy, but I think in general, and this from many points of view. La Scala was one of the first public buildings in Italy to have electric light. The firm Edison, who was providing electric light in the late 19th century, decided to illuminate La Scala because this was, of course, wonderful advertising for the firm. And the funny thing is that they are still with us. Now they are providing LEDs to save energy.
LEDs.
They are part of our green project to save energy at La Scala, which is working.
Yes.
And from an artistic point of view, La Scala always had sort of a balance, because on one hand, we always had very classical productions and so on. But just think about Toscanini. Toscanini arrived at La Scala deciding to conduct the Meistersinger, its first opera. And then he was surely the greatest Verdi conductor of its time, but he wanted to bring here Richard Strauss, a lot of Wagner, and when we made Boris Godunov last year, we had to underline that the first great advocate of Boris Godunov at La Scala was Toscanini. He conducted really several times, and then, for instance, if you think about Wagner, of course, Toscanini himself called Adolphe Appia to make his Tristan. But we also had the famous Valkyrie with Luca Ronconi, direct. And he was so modern, placed in the 19th century bourgeoisie, a few years before the famous staging by Patrice Chéreau in Bayreuth. So I think the identity of La Scala is not just in his tradition, but it is in this balance and sometimes in this conflict between a very strong tradition and a very strong will to be new, to be modern, to go ahead and to build a new tradition. We will see this year, because we are working a lot on Callas, of course, and we have an exhibition, and we actually made in the past many exhibitions about Callas, and all of them were with her photographs and costumes and objects and so on. But this time we decided to make something new, and we decided to make an exhibition about how contemporary arts look at Callas, which is a little revolutionary maybe, but I think it's very much also in the spirit of Callas, because Callas was an artist looking around, looking at everything. She liked fashion, of course. She had this long story with Pasolini, and she acted for him in Medea on screen.
I just want to tell people who may not know, Pier Paolo Pasolini was a Friulian poet, film director, creative artist, fantastic man who had a very strong artistic and I think personal understanding with Maria Callas. They really connected. And he was in ways a very different kind of man from Luchino Visconti, in some ways similar. But Callas, I think, was able in her most important artistic relationships to forge connections that went very deep and allowed herself to be guided, to be influenced, if not run by, but certainly educated by, is I think a good word, by these other creative artists. Another one was Tito Gobi, and where she just felt such a deep trust and personal connection. And another, as you said, was Pier Paolo Pasolini. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, we decided to try something new, and we had a look of how Maria Callas still has an influence on the arts. And so we asked five artists from different disciplines. So we have a fashion designer, Giorgio Armani, who gave us
I've
a
heard of him.
dress. um, a movie director, a movie and theater director, actually, Mario Martone.
Mhm.
And Mario did something quite interesting because, you know, during the rehearsals of Traviata, the writer Ingeborg Bachmann came to the the rehearsals, and she was with Hans Werner Henze. She had no special interest in music, and she hated opera. But when she heard the voice of Maria Callas, in a way everything changed.
Mhm.
And because and she still, and she wrote an essay saying, well, I still don't mind about opera. It's not my thing. But what I heard is something beyond opera. This is a real human voice. This is something that, of course, goes through operatic music, but is something even deeper and more personal and more sincere. And so basically, Mario Martone made a short movie with an Italian actress, Sonia Bergamasco, playing Ingeborg Bachmann and saying some words of this essay. And then we have a portrait of Maria Callas by Francesco Vezzoli, which is quite an important Italian artist. And I said a portrait, but it's actually 63 portraits of Maria Callas. It's a large panel embroidered by Francesco Vezzoli. And then we have a work by Latifa Ekshash, a Franco-Moroccan artist, and she did something. It's difficult to explain, but it's a sort of figure of Maria Callas made with little pearls. So it's something magic, but it also has to do with tears, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And the last work is by Alvin Curran. Alvin Curran is a composer quite renowned for the way he transforms the sounds of nature in a different acoustic landscape. And we had permission from the owner of the rights of Maria Callas to let Alvin work on some tapes of Maria Callas, and this is something similar to what we said about Ingeborg Bachmann. The idea is always that, of course, Maria Callas is one of the great opera singers of all times, but she has also something very, very strange and personal, and her voice has something something of a natural voice. She was, of course, super educated, and she had a super disciplined. She worked a lot on her voice, but still, the result of so much art was nature.
This sounds like a multidisciplinary exhibition.
Yes, yes, it is.
Where is it, and where can people see it, experience it, and until when?
Well, the exhibition is at the Scala Museum, so in Milan, in Largo Ghiringhelli, just next door to La Scala, and we already opened it. It's opened from mid-November, and it will stay open until April the 17th.
Okay.
And then
So friends visiting Milan, this is what I do all the time. I love going to the La Scala Museum because there's so much there to see and learn from. In addition to the special exhibitions, below is a lovely bar, and I will get a cup of risotto and a glass of wine and an espresso, and then go up and visit the museum. It's a perfect Milanese afternoon. And then to the right, as you're facing it, is the gift shop that has all of these magnificent recordings. So this is, even if you don't get to a performance at La Scala, and I hope you do, it's a wonderful way to experience part of what that theater
yes,
is.
we are now reopening the bookshop because well, we had just a change. We had a change of management.
Okay.
But it will be open the day after tomorrow, because the day after tomorrow we have the so-called anteprima for young people. And so we, before the premiere, we have this special event for people under 30, and we will reopen the bookshop on this occasion.
Very good. Now, Paolo, obviously I'm not in Milan and I wish I were, but I understand that there's an exhibition at the Galleria d'Italia on Piazza della Scala until February 18th, 2024, which are photo portraits of Maria Callas.
Yes, this
Okay.
is quite extraordinary because we have of course a large archive of pictures of her, and most of them were shot by Erio Piccagliani, our photographer for a long time. So all the pictures of Maria Callas inside La Scala are in the La Scala archive, and most of them are by Piccagliani. But she lived in Milan for a while,
Yeah.
and so the Galleria d'Italia got one of the biggest photo archives in Italy, and they are all photos from newspapers. It's all journalistic, and there are many pictures of her I have never seen before.
Wow.
And it's really special because, for instance, she, well, when she arrived in Milan, she was not elegant, she was not chic, and she didn't know what to wear, and so on. And then, partly because of the help of Luchino Visconti, she met this wonderful aristocrat who was also a fashion designer, the so-called Bicchi. And in this exhibition at the Galleria d'Italia, we have many pictures of Callas choosing dresses in the Bicchi atelier, which is so sweet, because you can see the happiness of this young woman who discovers that she can be beautiful on top of being a great singer. And you can really see that she's so happy, and she was so elegant.
She was. I saw one of the pictures online, and it's of Callas trying on a dress and looking in a mirror, and there's a little curtain that's open, and you see two little children looking at her, looking at herself. It's a wonderful picture. I just want to mention the website for that is Gallerie, GallerieDitalia.com, GalleriaD'Italia.com. So, Paolo, you said something that I think is very important to explore. When Maria Callas came to Milan, her first performance was April 12th of 1950 as Aida, and it was as a substitute for Renata Tebaldi. And she then came back for Vespri Siciliani 1951 on opening night, December 7th, and went on to do all of these roles. How did Milan change Maria Callas?
Well, a lot, a lot, because you know, Milan, as you mentioned, was not always an easy place for singers. But I think that something happened immediately because I was thinking today about the places where Maria Callas lived in Milan, the places she used to go to, and so on. But just think about the fact that she was not really famous at the time. She made a great sensation at the Arena di Verona, but well, she was very young, unexperienced, and then there is they choose her to step in for Tebaldi a couple of nights. And after that, they choose Maria Callas to make the opening night immediately, a few months later. And this was not an opening night like the others, because it was actually the first December 7. So it was the year when Victor de Sabata decided to move the opening night of La Scala from December 26 to December 7. And December 7 is the day of Sant'Ambrogio, the patron saint of Milan. So there was, in a way, a political will to make a stranger bond between the theater and the city. And they choose Maria Callas for this task. And the day and the following year, they had her again for Macbeth. So she made, well, she stayed. She didn't stay for a long time in the end, because it is 11 or 12 years, maybe if you count or not the last performances of Medea, which were in 1962. So, but in 11 years, she opened the season 6 times. Wow, that's really a lot.
Yep.
And Milan for her was the place of the transformation. So she arrived and she was overweight. She was not fashionable. She didn't really know how to behave. But then she met Visconti, and but not only Visconti. I think that, well, the most recent studies and recent scholars are trying to look a little deeper and considering not only the influence of Visconti, but for instance the influence of Tatiana Pavlova. Tatiana Pavlova was a stage director at La Scala. They made Fedora together, and if you look at Callas in Fedora, this wonderful dress with hermelin, you see how Visconti was not the only one working on building this myth of Maria Callas. There were also some women, of course Vicky, but also Pavlova and Margherita Wallman, another theater director. They were also important.
You were mentioning the places where Callas lived in Milan. I know there is a Largo Maria Callas named for her, because Milan, Verdi's home for retired artists is on Piazza Michelangelo, but the subway stop is Piazza Wagner. I study with Giorgio Strehler. There's a street via Giorgio Strehler. There's the Largo Toscanini near where Morella Freni used to live. You can walk around central Milan, and if you know where you're going, there are names for composers via Mercadante. Everyone is there. Via Verdi is in front of next to La Scala. And it's one of the remarkable things about the city, but I don't know any of her addresses. What streets did she live on? Do you know?
Yes, I know. When she arrived, her husband bought a small villa close to Buonarroti.
Mm-hmm.
So the address was 40 via Buonarroti. It was a nice building with a garden. So not really in central Milan. It was fashionable at the time to have a bigger house, not exactly in the center.
Mm-hmm.
And but the villa has been destroyed, and now there's another building there. So it doesn't exist anymore. Also, the Atelier by Vicky doesn't exist anymore, but the
Right.
building is still there in Via Sant'Andrea, so you can go and just see. It's written on the facade, but
Mm-hmm.
and so yes, she lived there in Buonarroti.
So I'm going to point something out you may or may not know. You, of course, know that Buonarroti was Michelangelo Buonarroti and the artist. And in Rome, where Michelangelo lived most of his Roman life, that building was destroyed. But not a long time ago, it was destroyed for Italy. It was destroyed in the 1860s.
Oh,
It's
wow.
near Piazza Venezia.
I
And
don't know.
it's where the Generali, where the large insurance company is. That very large building, which faces Piazza Venezia, Palazzo Venezia, the Roman Forum, Michelangelo lived right by Trajan's Column. And in the 1860s, they moved his house. They didn't destroy it, but they moved it. And in the fascist era, in the 1930s, they tried to move it again, and everything fell apart except for the facade. And they moved the facade of Michelangelo's house outside of Rome, not too far outside of Rome, where the Roman Water Commission is. And if you go behind this wall and gate for the Roman Water Commission, there's the original facade of the home of Michelangelo. Most people don't know that. And the thing is, I always think about the fact that in Italy, more than most places, you can go to where Dante lived, where Rossini lived, where everyone lived. But Michelangelo, no. Maria Callas, apparently, no. And it's very interesting who survived and who didn't, so to speak, architecturally. I mean, in my view, having studied Callas my whole opera life, I see Milan as the place of her transformation. I see New York as the place that gave her who she is, even though her parents were from Greece. I see her wartime years in Greece as fortifying her personality and her determination. I see Milan as the flowering, the deepening of everything that she became as an artist. And I see Paris as her final years, I won't say decline, I don't see it as decline, but her final years when she was a famous venerated artist who finished singing at the age of 42, but lived another 11 years. And she only lived to the age of 53. So therefore, it was not a long life. Her myth continues, her recorded legacy continues. And next week, I'll be talking a lot about her recordings. But many of these recordings were made at La Scala. And
Yes.
what's very interesting is that she would sing a role and the cast would be there, and then they would record it. Because she did 23 roles, and I don't know if all 23 were recorded, but most of them I think were.
Yes, I'm not sure if all of them were recorded, but Yes. You know, some of them were professionally recorded. We have anyway some documentation for others. And of course, the great pity is the quality of the recording of Traviata.
Yeah.
This is a great pity. But I think one must also say that in Milan she found some extraordinary conductors, and because well she sang with, of course, with De Sabata, with Giulini.
Mm-hmm.
We had this incredible Turco in Italia with Cavazzeni,
Mm-hmm.
and
Tullio Serafin,
Serafin. Yes, I think
Thomas Schippertz, and Leonard Bernstein. Leonard Bernstein was the
yes,
first American to conduct at La
yes.
Scala, and it
But
was with,
I think
yeah,
Serafin is the key,
talk
not the
about
only
Tullio
key,
Serafin.
but Serafin has really a great and enormous role. Then, of course, her Tosca with the Sabbath is such a masterpiece,
Mm-hmm.
and you could forget of any other conductor. But
Yeah.
but I think in this idea of coming here and finding the way to blossom, to become really herself, one should always remember the role of Tullio Serafin.
Talk about him more. He's forgotten. Very recently, I had a guest on, Daniel Serafin, who is a descendant of Tullio Serafin, and this is the Serafin family of Vienna. And his sister Martina, I think her name is or Martha, is a dramatic soprano. His father is a famous baritone. Obviously, you and I on another occasion can sit down and talk about the relationship of Milan and Vienna. Fascinating in every point of view. Milan having been under the Austrian Empire, Teatro alla Scala often being called a Habsburg theater. I don't think of it that way, but people do. I should just say La Scala opened in 1778. Empress
Yes,
Maria
yes.
Theresa was on the throne.
This is important and strange because La Scala was important for the city in the first place because it was the first theater in the city which was not a court theater. The previous theater was inside the royal palace. Then a fire destroyed it,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the Milanese aristocracy who asked the empress to have the permission to build a theater. So, of course, the decree is signed Maria Theresa, but the money
Is
came from
Milanese.
came from the people of Milan, from the Milanese aristocracy,
Yeah.
and that's why I don't think that La Scala was really a Habsburg theater, and that's why I think this is the very origin of the idea of having La Scala so much rooted in Milan, because the Milanese paid for it.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
And if my memory serves, there was a church there called Santa Maria alla Scala, Saint Mary of the Steps. And that church was taken down, which is unusual in Italy to tear down a church, and built
Yes,
the theater on top
yes,
of where.
a little embarrassing maybe.
And that's why it's called La Scala, because of
Yes.
the church that was there before. I was very fortunate in that the year that I came to work at La Scala was 1978, which was the bicentennial of
Yeah.
La Scala. So therefore, much of what I learned about the history of the theater, of the company, and so on, was because I was there for the bicentennial. I first attended a performance there in 1975 when I was living in Bologna. And so my point of reference is that time. Callas was still alive at that time in 75, not 78.
Yeah.
And people were talking about her as if she were very present in Milan. And it was only a few years, only 13 or 14 years after she stopped singing in Milan. So therefore, it was unusual. I was a very young man. I was a teenager. And to meet all of these people who had direct memories of hearing Callas in Milan live. And so I sort of feel that I'm one of the people who has to carry on what people have said to me to talk about her and the way we come to understand her. One thing that I learned in that time in Milan is the role of critics. And in American English, when we say critics, it sounds negative. But I think sometimes you can call them scholars, you can call them experts. I'm not here to name one or the other critic, but I carefully read all of the critics in Corriere della Sera, in Il Giornale, in later in La Repubblica, in La Stampa, in Il Messaggero when they came to Milan from Rome. I read all of them because for me it was an education. And Corriere della Sera was Milan's newspaper. And in the days leading up to December 7th every year, there would be pages and pages of coverage of the La Scala opening, but not just the opera being done, although they would have great details about, let's say it was Otello, great details about Otello, but they would also have interviews with the artist, with the designers. They would talk to audience members about what they were anticipating. The buildup was enormous. If there was the threat of a strike, they would cover that. If there was some dissension, gossip, they would cover that. They covered everything. And then the day of December 7th would be this enormous, gorgeous insert in Corriere della Sera, often of 16 pages, everything that one could want to know about the opera
It's
Otello at this
now
stage.
24.
It's remarkable.
24 pages.
It is remarkable. With the New York Times, if we're lucky for the Metropolitan Opera, we'll have 2 or 3 stories in the week leading up to opening night. And that's what I mean, that the imagination of the public and anyone who reads Corriere della Sera and is in Milan or focused on Milan, it's of another dimension. I didn't experience this in Vienna, although you do to some degree, not in Paris, not in London, certainly not in New York. It is a remarkable phenomenon every year leading up to December 7th. And I know this year you're doing Don Carlo. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I'm mentioning this because I have not in my long career in opera experienced that anywhere else. And so I take that experience and move it back to the 1950s to what Maria Callas was surrounded with, the degree of conversation in the community, and not just among those lucky enough to get a ticket to the performance. The whole city would be talking about what was happening at La Scala. And therefore, this environment that I want listeners to understand is not simply a great theater with wonderful musicians and conductors. It is the civic conversation for the entire city of Milan. And even if there's fashion, when I was in Milan, there was unfortunately terrorism in addition to fashion. The city goes up and down in terms of its cleanliness. Now it's a very green and clean city. There was a time when it was a very polluted city. You couldn't see the mountains. Now you can see the mountains. It's a city that has built up its public transportation infrastructure. It has whole districts that are green now. You have what is called the Bosco Grattacielo. It's a series of buildings that are basically
Bosco Verticale.
Like Bosco Verticale. Milan is a city that is very focused on itself, on its image, on the way things ought to be done, and there's often consensus, sometimes there's not. Claudio Abbado, the great conductor, when he died, left money to plant 90,000 trees in Milan. I don't know if that will happen, but this sense of Milan moving forward while the rest of Italy and the rest of Europe stagnates is very notable. I was in Milan a lot in 2015 because there was the World Expo about sustainability, and La Scala did how many 15 productions, I think, during the expo.
Yes,
Yeah, a
yes,
phenomenal thing that people felt during the summer when La Scala might be closed, that you have to have opera if you're coming to Milan for the expo to study sustainability and energy and food and air and all that, that you need culture too. And it was May 1st was the opening, and you did Turandot, and I was there. And it was just an astonishing thing. And I bring this back because sometimes the reputation of La Scala is of being difficult. And it can be, but any theater can be difficult. But so much is accomplished. And I think that Callas, who was a very hard worker, entered that environment of hard work.
yes, yes.
And it's not what people
But
always associate with Milan, with La Scala, but very lavorare stanca, in really working. Um, because she, let's not forget, did 23 roles, but she recorded all of these roles, almost all of them, and she was singing occasionally elsewhere.
of course,
It's not that she only stayed in Milan. She sang in different parts of Italy. She sang a little bit in the UK, a little bit in the United States, but her her core was Milan. So, do you have a favorite Callas role at La Scala?
uh, well, this is difficult to say because maybe I'd say Lucia. I love her Lucia, and but even I don't know. Of course, Traviata. Of course, Sonnambula.
That's
I
mine.
adore Fiorilla.
Hmm.
Fiorilla is so funny and witty.
From Il Turco in Italia.
Yeah,
Mine definitely is La Sonnambula, which is
yeah,
not necessarily my favorite opera elsewhere by Bellini. It's an excellent opera, but it was directed by Visconti. There's something very otherworldly about this sleepwalking girl, and the way you
yes.
can hear, and there are recordings, of course, so I want people to listen, the way she
Because, you know,
transforms
Visconti
this.
had this idea to have La Sonnambula as a ballerina. She
Mhm.
was a dancer. And the dress was the dress of a ballerina. And then after all what happened, they had this idea of having her singing a non giunge, looking straight at the audience, walking towards the audience with the light coming up.
Mhm.
And so it was an incredible effect. And you know, Carlo Fracci started after a Sonnambula because at the time there was this tradition of having a little essay by the pupils of the dance school of La Scala, together with a performance together with an opera performance. And so Carla Fracci had her debut during one of this little shows from people from the school, but with Callas. So
So for
there's
people
a
who may
link
not
between the
know,
two.
people may not know Carla Fracci, who died not too long ago. And I knew her very well, actually, because she performed a lot in New York. And when I worked at the Metropolitan Opera, she was often here. But I knew her in Italy, and she lived in Milan, but she also lived in Florence in an
Yeah,
apartment just by the Arno. And she was very politically committed, as I am. And we shared political viewpoints. So therefore, we had a lot to talk about. And I found her engagement as an artist who was politically committed very important. She was not the only one. Pasolini was, I guess you could say Visconti certainly was,
Yeah.
and many, many artists in Europe and Italy and in the United States engage in their political commitments in different ways. But Fracci was very present on the front lines of the things that she stood for, and yet also was this ethereal, magnificent ballerina who became a great teacher. And Paolo, if you would, because you have the vantage point there, in one of my last visits to Milan, saw Fracci teach. And would you talk about Carla Fracci as a teacher? I just want to say she was one of the world's great ballerinas. We want to establish that.
Well, yes, she did teach in several cities all around Italy, and she never had the title of head of the La Scala Ballet School, and she was quite unhappy about that.
Mm-hmm.
But and in the end, the director of La Scala Ballet, Emmanuel Legris, decided to call her. She was already an old woman, but she came. She was happy to do that, and she came for some master classes about Giselle, and we made a video of it, so we have it. And it's, for me, is especially moving that she made one of these master classes with Nicoletta Manni. Nicoletta Manni is a young prima ballerina, and she learned a lot because Fracci, as a teacher, she was a nightmare. She would continue making correction. And when in the end, Nicoletta actually danced Giselle, I remember Carla, after the performance, going back to her and saying, well, it was wonderful. You were great. Still, give me a moment, because there are still a couple of things that we could fix. And this was Carla Fracci, and I'm very happy to say that a few weeks ago, Nicoletta Manni was nominated Étoile of Teatro alla Scala.
Oh,
yes, after a performance of Onegin with the other Étoile, Roberto Bolle. And yes, it was very emotional because the intendant, Mr. Meyer, decided to do it on stage after the performance. So we did it with the open curtain and all the corps de ballet and the public cheer and the audience cheering. So really very emotional.
Since you're talking about the La Scala curtain, let me say something first. In the 1980s, the La Scala Ballet visited the Metropolitan Opera, and I was the performance manager. And because I knew your theater and because I spoke Italian, I was very much the liaison between La Scala and the Met, and had the honor of working with this company every week. And Carla Fracci was there. It was fascinating because audiences here had no concept of La Scala Ballet. They knew obviously of the opera company, which came in 1976, but they didn't know of this ballet company, which was quite wonderful. So the La Scala curtain. At the Met, we have this gorgeous gold silk curtain made of silk from Como, north of Milan, but you very seldom see it anymore. And we used to have curtain calls, which is to say applause for the singers after every act. So that if you did Rigoletto, you would have it after Act 1, Act 2, and then at the end of the opera. Now the Met, and not only, many theaters only have curtain calls at the end. I can tell you how exciting it is for me when I'm at La Scala to cheer the second act of Rigoletto, because you've just had this amazing experience of the duet of Rigoletto and Gilda. And then after that,
Vendetta.
suddenly there's Leonucci and Nadine Sierra, for example, coming out and receiving the immediate response from the audience, rather than our waiting until after the opera. And I miss that terribly. So I hope what you can tell me is that this tradition will remain at La Scala, and your opinion of having curtain calls after every act.
Well, we do it. We do it. Of course, it depends. You made the right example with Rigoletto, because after the Vendetta, one needs to applaud. One
Yeah,
needs to see the singers again.
yeah.
And but even I don't know, even after Sempre Libera, uh, yes, you need it. Sometimes, especially, for instance, in contemporary or 20th century opera, this is not the case.
Mm-hmm. Then it's
But
okay.
but still, we do that, and I think it's beautiful to have a response, and it's good for the singers to feel the connection with the audience, and yes,
That's
because
my opinion too.
otherwise,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's you have quite a cold sensation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's closed. Let's
Yep.
go to the bar.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Wagner, when he wrote Parsifal, specified that no applause after Act One, but he very clearly said, we want a lot of applause after Act Two. And, so audiences who follow Wagner know that you do not applaud after Act One. But if Wagner could give directions about when to applaud, it's because he understood that the singers needed, I think they really need it. I think they need that enormous pat on the back and this surge of energy from the audience to keep them going. And I think it's very, very important. Obviously, an opera like Electra, which is one act, or if
Yeah,
you
of
do the
course.
Boris Godunov just with as one act, that's a different thing. But I miss it terribly in theaters where they don't have it. And I think that it's a harm to opera, is my opinion. You don't have to agree or disagree, but that is my opinion. And when we hear recordings of Callas and we hear the applause at certain points, you know that people were there and you know that Callas was singing to an audience.
Yes.
So
Well,
did I?
but Callas, does this incredible recording of the night when she came back to sing Medea again, and does the entrance applause.
Yeah.
And this is really stunning, because you feel like being there,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't finish.
Yeah.
It's really without an end,
Yeah.
and you can hear for minutes, and she still didn't sing a note.
Mm-hmm. Um, did I leave anything else out about Callas in Milan that you would like to add before we talk about the season that's about to open?
No, I don't think so. No,
Okay.
no, I think it's
Well, I think you did a great job, and I thank you. Um, Callas, I didn't realize this until I did my research, actually sang Elisabetta in Don Carlo at La Scala on April 12th of 1954.
yes.
I subsequently heard the recording only very recently, but I didn't know that that was part of her repertoire. I knew that she sang the Eboli arias in concert in Paris, I believe,
Yeah.
and maybe Hamburg. But I use that as a transition to say that you are about to open your season with Don Carlo.
Don
For
Carlo.
many people, their favorite opera of all. I just want to point out one thing that this, if I'm showing correctly,
There
is
is,
Callas's
yes, there
face,
is a lot of Callas in
Emozione Scala.
Mezzo. Yeah.
Now, one thing that this was the English language version. I have it in Italian too, but you have told me, I know this because you have told me that there's been a great effort at La Scala to go green, to go carbon neutral,
Yes.
and so on. And I'm very impressed with this brochure, which is basically 2 sheets of paper and with very large letters. Because when I get publications from other theaters, and I don't need glasses, so I can read well, but often the writing is so small that you don't know what's going on and you can't find the names of who's singing in a lot of theaters. And here, I mean, I could look at this program and tell you everybody who's singing of the major roles. And it's a wonderful season. And I would like to go through the
Thank
season with
you.
you. Oh, I mean, I wouldn't say that.
I'm
Paolo,
gonna
you
tell
know
Mr.
me.
Meyer.
You know me enough to know that if I don't think something is wonderful, I don't say it. I'm not Bella Figura.
Sorry?
I'm not Bella Figura. If I don't think something is wonderful, I don't say it's wonderful.
Okay.
I don't say it's bad. But if I think something is wonderful, I do. I'm very Genovese in this way. For people who know Italy. But if I believe something sincerely, I say it, and I do sincerely believe it's a really wonderful season. And I'd like to go through the operas with you. There's a lot more, of course. There are more than 250 performances this coming season.
Yes, I think one thing that, as you told, one thing that people does not expect from La Scala is that we are, of course, an opera theater, but we have a lot of ballet and a lot of concerts.
Yeah. So
So the
December
symphonic
7th
season at La Scala it's huge. It's a lot of
it is huge, yeah. And some
but
years a lot of visiting orchestras in addition to the La Scala Philharmonic.
yes.
Yeah. Recitals from singers, from instrumentalists, and so on. But let's start with the season. Number one, I know who Riccardo Chailly is. Would you please tell people who Riccardo Chailly is?
Well, Riccardo Chailly is a Milanese conductor. He comes from a musical family. He started when he was very, very young, and with also with a sort of a spirit of rebellion uh, to the musical world. Also rebellion to his father, who was a renowned composer in Italy, and then he started working as an assistant to Claudia Bado. He had a strong connection with composers as Bruno Bettinelli and so on. And he had a strong connection with Bruno Bartoletti. Bruno Bartoletti was an Italian conductor who conducted for a long time at the Lyric Opera in Chicago.
Yes.
And well, basically, Chailly was called to conduct a Decca recording of the arias of Guglielmo Tell by Rossini, and he was so good that they decided to record the whole opera with Pavarotti, Freni, and he has a contract.
And Caballé.
Sorry?
And Monserrat Caballé.
With Caballé, he did.
No, wasn't Caballé also on that recording?
No.
Because one of the Freni sang one role and
Freni.
Caballé the other, I think. We'll have to check.
We have to check.
Yeah.
I know that in the first years of his career, he conducted Caballé in one of her rare appearances as public appearances as Cho Sang, because she recorded it, but she didn't sing live very often.
Right. Wow.
And then Chailly has been a great symphonic conductor for many years. He focused on the symphonic repertoire in Berlin, and then at the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam, then Gewandhaus in Leipzig. He has also been the principal conductor at the Comunale di Bologna. And he is special because he has a very, very large repertoire, from Bach to contemporary music. And he always had a very strong connection with composers, with Luciano Berio. He was the first to conduct the Berio Finale for Turandot, for instance. And now he is the music director of Teatro alla Scala. In the first years of his tenure, he focused on early versions of opera, which is funny. It's funny because what he said about the fact that the whole city is talking about the opening title, even if they don't know very much about it. And when Shai started doing early versions, it was wonderful, because it could happen that you for instance, take a taxi, and on the cab, the cab driver starts saying, but well, I'm not sure that the first version of is of Butterfly is really so valuable as Mr. Shea thinks. And it's funny because it's people who never came to see an opera, but all of a sudden have opinions about the fact that you should perform the Goro aria or not.
Yeah. Only Milan and Vienna. Same thing with the taxi drivers in Vienna, all have their opinions about what the opera should be doing. My connection to Riccardo Chailly is that he only conducted one production at the Metropolitan Opera, and it was Le Conte of Man by Offenbach. And it was a very fine production by Otto Schenk and Gunther Schneider-Simpson with Placido Domingo. It was, in fact, an amazing production that people miss. But he never came back, and I never quite knew why. But he and I would go out and talk, have a meal or whatever, because he and I have another connection, that the little town where I live in Liguria is where his parents lived. And I knew his father. And Luciano Berio was Ligurian, Liguria being the Italian Riviera, the capital, Genoa. And therefore, Chailly in my little town, which I won't mention by name, is a well-known figure. And Fabio Luisi lives in that town as well. It's very interesting that this little town happens to have these important musical figures. Anyway, another Ligurian is singing Don Carlo, Francesco Melli.
Yes.
Yep. So Don Carlo, the opera, there are so many different versions. Which version are you doing?
The Milanese one.
Which is?
Which is in 4 acts in Italian. The one Verdi wrote in the 80s for Milan. The basic versions are the original one for Paris, 5 acts in French. Then we have the so-called Modena version, 5 acts in Italian, and the La Scala version, 4 acts in Italian. And Don Carlo is quite often performed in Milan. It's really part of our identity, and many of the music directors of La Scala conducted it, and quite often for the opening. Claudio Abbado did it twice. 2 wonderful productions, the first by Ponnell and the second one by Luca Ronconi. The second one was quite a scandal, and we are retrospect, talking about the fact that sometimes La Scala was really looking to the future. And well, if you think about that production now, it would be quite traditional, actually.
Yeah.
But at the time it was a scandal.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm especially happy to have Don Carlo Baixei, because he conducted a quite famous version in Amsterdam, and I think it sincerely is one of my favorite versions, because it's powerful, and he has this extraordinarily understanding of the Italian world, of the so-called parola scenica.
Mm-hmm.
And it is an incredible balance between the symphonic power of this music and the intimacy of this almost spoken language in Italian. And I think I have really great expectation, also because we have great singers.
A great
So,
cast: Renee Papa, Francesco Belli, Luca Salsi, Anna Netrebko, Elena Garancha. That's a great opening night cast.
yeah.
What's not to love?
And
Then
of
you,
course,
yes,
it's completely sold out.
of course.
Being sold out is not an exception nowadays at La Scala.
Yeah.
So yes, please always go to the website
Ahead of time.
quite early, because it's not difficult to find tickets for La Scala. It is difficult to find last minute tickets.
Yes. How many seats are in La Scala now?
2,000.
Okay. After I
It
want to
depends
talk
on the lights, of course. Sometimes
Yes.
we need a box to put some lights, but basically it's 2,000.
After I want to talk to you a bit about the new building that's happening there, because it's important. But just quickly through the season, we'll cover all the operas, but to some degree. Medea, the French version of Cherubini's Medea, that Maria Callas famously sang at La Scala, with Sonia Yancheva as Medea. I want to point out the conductor, because it was you, Paolo, who introduced me to Michele Gamba.
Yeah.
And we have become friends. He's a very intelligent,
He's a smart
deep-thinking
guy.
young man. He's from Milan. His parentage is part Tuscan and part from Puglia. And I introduced him to fried chicken here in New York. But when he came to conduct Elisir d'Amore, he'd never had fried chicken. But we became friends, and I thank you for that, because he's incredibly intelligent. And I had him come to my class one night at New York University, and he sat down at the piano, because I provided the piano that night. I don't usually do that. And I said, you don't have to play, but if you want to play, don't hesitate. And this is on video for people to watch. I've said this before, he's deeply intelligent, and he has a good facility for explaining complex musical ideas. And he's a young man.
Yes, Michele is special, I think. Well, he is, first of all, really a musician, a complete musician. He's a pianist, basically. He started as a pianist, and he still plays sometimes. He accompanied Francesco Meli in several concerts. But he also did the German repertoire with Markus Werber.
Mm-hmm.
They made Winterreise together. So you need to be a real pianist to play Winterreise.
It's true. He's a protege of Antonio Pappano and Daniel Barenboim.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He studied with them. He was the assistant for a while. And now he's doing well in many places all over the world. He conducts in in the States. He made New York and Washington.
Mm-hmm.
He conducts in Dresden. So yes, he's doing a lot, and I have great expectations. As far as I know, he's going to read this Medea in well, as part of the French neoclassical movement. So you will hear a lot of Gluck, basically. And I also I also have expectations of what Damiano Micheletto is doing, because we will have we will open the season with a very traditional Don Carlo, and then we will have a very modern Medea. So I cannot tell you very much because I still have to talk with Damiano. But as far as I know, his idea is to focus on the children.
Okay.
Yes, the idea is to look at the story of Medea with the eyes of these children who will be sacrificed in the end.
Yeah.
And so it could be interesting. And this is one case where I mean, in this case, La Scala is really starting from its tradition and looking for something really new.
And I find that interesting in the construction of the season, also because you can feel a little bit the awareness of Maria Callas without it being a Maria Callas tribute season.
Yeah.
The next opera is one of my very favorites, and maybe my favorite opera sometimes. The one that I was fortunate to work on at La Scala with Giorgio Strehler, Simone Boccanegra, by Verdi, of course. And it starts February 1st. It's on for much of February. The very athletic Lorenzo Viotti is conducting.
You know, look, there is something really funny about Lorenzo, because on one hand there is his image on Instagram, and then you have the idea that he is spending all his time at the gym.
Yes.
But on the other hand, it's incredible the discipline and knowledge and how really dedicated he is to his work. So he has a sparkling image, but he is one of the most serious musicians I met. He is really always posing questions about music, studying, and he is one of the most prepared.
And the stage director is Daniele Abbado, who was a guest on the show about a year ago, of the Abbado family. Boccanegra is Luca Salsi, who is also in Don Carlo. Very fine cast. The wonderful Eleonora Burato is Amelia Maria.
Yes, Eleonora is really one of the big discoveries of the last years. I think I really love her. At the beginning, she was a little in the corner. Well, she is the new little Mirella Freni, because of the voice is sometimes similar, and also he's so even in well, from low to high register. And so she has something of Mirella Freni, but she also has more and more her own personality.
She does.
I adore her.
I do too. I was very fortunate to know Mirella Freni quite well, and I loved her. But I can tell you one thing about Eleonora Burato. She's a much better cook than Mirella Freni. Much better. You may not know this about Eleonora. You can ask her. She travels with a recipe book when she travels, not only her musical scores, but recipes from her family, so that wherever she is in the world, she can cook the food of her home from Mantova, because that makes her feel more at home, which is a very interesting thing. Then you have Die Entführung aus dem Seraglio, sung in German, the abduction from the Seraglio, Il Ratto del Seraglio, a role that Maria Callas sang, her only Mozart.
Yes, that's incredible, isn't
Costanza.
it?
Yeah.
You would not expect her to sing Constanze.
No, and
but she did.
It's an incredible, and you have Jessica Pratt, a wonderful Australian soprano, as Costanza. It's a great opera. It was my father's, who was a musician, his favorite Mozart. He loved just the incredible, he loved the George Schulte version, the incredible outpouring of music that came in this opera. And it's
Yes.
not done very often.
Yeah. No, Dominique Meyer decided to have in each season an old production, an historical production. And this is one of the finest production by George Strehler.
Sure.
And it has this beautiful idea. It's not an opera. It's rather a singspiel, so you have part in spoken language and part is sung. And the idea of Strehler is to have the spoken language in silhouette, and then a light on a spot on the singers when they sing the arias.
Yeah.
And it is still so perfect, so modern. So it works perfectly. And this is another case in which we have a young conductor, Thomas Gugeis. He also has been an assistant of Daniel Barenboim, and he is one of the upcoming conductors on the German scene. And he made he stepped in for Barenboim for some concerts here. And well, we really loved him and we invited him.
And then comes my other favorite opera, is Rossini's Guillaume Tell. I've worked on that opera a lot. It's just a magnificent opera, and I love every note Rossini wrote. And I do love Italiana and Algeri more than most people do, and I love Semiramide, even if you cannot tell the story. But Guillaume Tell is just a thing apart. And you have a wonderful Rossini conductor, Michele Mariotti. You have an excellent cast up and down. I've worked with some of them. And why with Chiaramuti? Oh, it's Chiaramuti's directing. I didn't even see that.
Yes.
So it's kind of like Family Day. You have Abbatos, and you have Viottis, and you have Mutis. It's interesting. No, I mean
we also have a Brook.
You do. That's right. I mean, I mean this in a very good way. That it's part of the legacy and the tradition that people who have worked in this theater, who have associations with the theater, that if their next generations go into the art form, if they're good, and only if they're good, they wind up working at La Scala.
Yeah, I think of course it's easier for people growing in a musical or theatrical family to, if they have talent, to work on it, to make the early steps earlier than other people.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really a little bit a part of the world of theater to have. I mean, to have I don't know, a couple of Kleibers, father and son, and a couple of Viottis, and well, even a couple of Chailly.
Of course, yeah.
Yes, he is also coming from a musical family with an important father, because he was a composer. So yes, I think it happens, and we are happy because most of these artists already have an established story at La Scala. For instance, Daniele Abbado made several productions with us, and he is, yes, of course, he is an Abbado, but he is an accomplished and renowned director on his own. And I must say, Chiaramuti had a strong development in recent years. So he started doing little things, and then more and more, and then this, I think it's a good occasion for her to show that she's grown up,
Mhm.
and she can do big things
Yeah,
without her father,
yeah.
and with an extraordinary conductor like Michele Mariotti. I
And for people
really
who don't know, he's part of the Mariottis of Pesaro, the family that is very involved in the Rossini Festival in Pesaro, Rossini Opera Festival, which was founded in 1984 with Luca Ronconi and Claudio Abbado doing the modern version of Il Viaggio
yeah.
Rems, which I worked on. That was a wonderful experience. Um, then we have La Rondine by Giacomo Puccini. And I think it's one of the operas that the world will see the most next year. The Met is doing it when you're doing it, basically in March and April. Riccardo Chailly is conducting, and Puccini died in 1924. And
Yes.
therefore, the world will be observing the 100th anniversary of his death, a year after the birth of Maria Callas. Why La Rondine?
I think, well, and well, for La Scala, it's not even a choice, because Riccardo Chailly is conducting a complete cycle of Puccini operas.
Okay.
So he did most of them. We made last year La Bohème in the
Mhm.
old production by Zeffirelli. So no way to make another Bohème this year. And we didn't have a great choice, because Chailly already conducted most of the operas. So the choice was between maybe La Rondine, Edgar, and the Vigli.
Fanciulla. Oh, the village.
No, we did Fanciulla. We did
Okay.
Fanciulla. But I I must say that I'm very happy, because I always loved La Rondine. It's strange. It's an opera born. Well, the project was for an operetta at the beginning,
Mhm.
and then it changed to be an opera, and it is a sort of more modern La Traviata. It is the story of an impossible love between. It's something between a little Traviata, a little Rosenkavalier. There is this this older woman who, in the end, gives up to his love, and it has a real opera with sometimes the taste of an operetta, and a so subtle and refined orchestration.
Yeah.
I think it's a great work in the end.
I interrupted you when you were saying that the other options were Le Villi and Edgar, which were Puccini's first two operas. La Rondine is particular because, as you said, Paolo, he intended to do it as an operetta for Vienna. But then the First World War came, and Italy was
Yeah.
on one side and Austria on the other side. So it was repurposed and it premiered in Monte Carlo.
Yes.
And when I teach it, especially when I've taught singers about it, I often say that I want you to think of Musetta and Rodolfo as the survivors of La Boheme a number of years later, and Musetta becomes Magda and Rodolfo becomes Ruggiero. Because if you can see that direct line, because they're writers and they're women who are with a lot of men and so on, you come to understand them more. And I agree, I like what you said about a bit of De Rosenkavalier. That does make a lot of sense. Now, next comes the famous operatic pairing of Cavalleria Rusticana and Pagliacci. Famously in Milan, there was a competition for one-act operas, and Cavalleria Rusticana won. And they're often done together. Um, in New York, they're known as ham and eggs. I don't know if you know that. When we do them, they're referred to, we're doing ham and eggs. I don't know why. But you have Elena Garancia, one of my very favorite. You have a great cast for Cavalleria Rusticana. Francesco Di Santo. Alfio is, I cannot pronounce his name, but he's a wonderful Mongolian baritone. Inkbot
Ekbat
Amar
Martushin.
Amartushin. He's a fantastic
We
baritone.
all just call him Amar.
Okay. And the wonderful American tenor Brian Jade is Turidu. But I want to know who's singing Mama Lucia.
We are still not sure.
Okay, because Mama Lucia is just a magnificent role, and there is a ancient Italian mezzo soprano. She won't like that I say ancient, but she is Elena Zilio,
Nazilio.
who still sings the role. And I saw her do it in London a couple of years ago, and she was really very, very good. And
Yes.
you know, maybe you can go to the home for retired singers that Verdi built in Milan and find Mama Lucia. But it's a great role. That's why.
Yes, yes, it
Yeah.
can be a great role, and we have an eye on Elena Cilia because we had her in
Andrea Chenier.
Chenier.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I love when old artists, and I mean very old artists, still have a lot to contribute and they're given the opportunity. I don't believe that old artists should be just moved off the stage if they still have something to say and do. And then wonderful cast of Pagliacci. I'm going through it because I want to get to other things.
Yes.
Then we have Donizetti's Don Pasquale, Evelino Pidot, Davide Livermore conducting. Great cast again, led by Ambrogio Maestri, who's Don Pasquale. And it's a La Scala production that I know. Andrea Carol, the wonderful American tenor Lawrence Brownlee is Ernesto, and Malatesta is Mattia Olivieri.
Yes. Yes, you know, we try anyway. We are trying to have uh, a little variety in singers. For a long time, La Scala had more or less always the same singers, and having, for instance, Brian Yacht for to redo, or having back Lawrence Brownlee. I think it's important. It's just the idea that hearing more voices is a good thing, and so we are really happy to have them and to have Andrea Carol.
So it is no secret I love Donizetti. I don't love this opera. And the reason I don't love this opera, the music is fantastic, of course, but they are so cruel. They treat so
With this
badly Don
poor,
Pasquale that it
with
just
this poor guy.
it's really, I cannot laugh because they're just so cruel to him. But anyway, Ambrogio Maestri is magnificent. His diction is great. He's a fantastic artist. And I would come even if I have mixed feelings about the story.
Yeah, and we have Mattia. Mattia is has been in New York now at the Met.
Yeah.
Mattia Olivieri.
Yes.
Yes.
And then you have Massenet's Werther, always good to see. Co-produced with Paris, Champs-Élysées. Benjamin Bernheim is the French tenor. And I don't know the Charlotte, Victoria Karkacheva. I don't even know. I've never heard her.
Yes, because she is a winner. She comes right from a competition. You must know that my my boss Dominique Meyer has a passion for being at the competitions,
Yes.
because he thinks that it is important to be on the spot, to hear new voices, and so of course there are agencies, but it is important for an artistic director to be there, to hear and to judge the voices from the very beginning.
Well, I'm going to say something about him.
Sorry?
I'm going to say something about Dominique Meyer, who I respect a lot. You can send other heads of opera companies to competitions, and they won't know a good voice if they hear it. No, I'm serious. I'm not being cruel, but not every great head of an opera company knows a great voice, and he does. And I've spoken to him on different occasions about what makes a great voice, and He certainly does. Now, you have Anna Netrebko coming in late June and July for Turandot.
Yes.
With
It's a new production.
Yes, so not the one I saw in 2015, a new production. Okay.
Yes, yes, a new production by Davide Livermore. And we also have Roberto Alagna. We have Yusuf, of course, and we are very excited about having these two tenors. So having both Yusuf is nowadays a great calaf, and Roberto Alagna is really a great tenor. We had some problem with him years ago, and we are so happy about this reconciliation.
Well, I am too, and I'm not going to get into that except to say that the audience had a role in that problem.
Yes, yes. You know,
and
sometimes
so I don't think the theater had a problem with him, and I don't think he had a problem with the theater.
No. The theater had no problem with Roberto.
Right, I know.
We are back to the discussion about the audience.
The audience, yeah.
Sometimes they can be a little cruel.
Yeah. So I want to point something out because people ask me all the time, I'll be in Italy in July and there's no opera in theaters. This Turandot will be in July at La Scala. So visitors who go to Italy next summer can hear Turandot with a great star, several great stars in the theater. Now, one that I'm very happy to see on your list is Il Cappello di Paglia di Firenze, the Florentine straw
It's so lovely.
By Nino Rota. I did a program about him, I think, in March. Greatly underappreciated composer. I'm suddenly forgetting the name. I think it's James Fedek is a conductor at the Teatro delle Verme. He's an American, but he's a specialist in Nino Rota. He's not conducting. You have Donato Renzetti, who's great. But I think it's interesting in Milan that there's a revival of interest in Nino Rota, who was from Puglia, composed famously for Fellini, but was also a marvelous opera and symphonic composer. And what is
I think it's already a tradition because Riccardo Muti has a special appreciation for Nino Rota. He conducted Rota with our orchestra and he recorded it for EMI. And later on, Riccardo Chailly also conducted and recorded a Rota album. And in the other Milanese orchestra, the Orchestra Verdi, which is now called just Orchestra Sinfonica di Milano, made a complete cycle of all Rota's music conducted by Giuseppe Grazioli. So yes, it is a revival, but it is on the long term. I think nowadays Rota is really appreciated and loved in Milano.
And the very important thing that I want to point out, because this is another thing I love about La Scala, the production is by the Accademia di Perfezionamento per Cantanti Lirici of Teatro La Scala. In other words, it would be like going to the Milan Football Club and seeing the young players.
Yes.
Which does not mean they're not good, because there might be the next Roberto Baggio or Lionel Messi, or pick your favorite football player. And La Scala has this marvelous school that I wish you could talk about. A very famous recent graduate is Priti Yende.
Yes.
And the soprano from South Africa. And when I've spoken to her, not on stage, we've spoken privately, we talk about the La Scala method and what she learned about being an opera singer by studying at the La Scala school. Now, I've taught in many schools, not at that one, and each one is different and each one has their strengths. But please talk about what makes it very particular, because it's a wonderful institution.
Well, the Accademia now is a big school. It's the first school by La Scala was the ballet school. It started in 1813, so a lot of time ago. And this is already one thing we should underline. Most of the dancer of the La Scala Ballet have a past in the academy.
Mm-hmm.
And this is important because a part of their personal level, it means that they all have the same style.
Yeah.
They all have from the same, they come from the same school, and most of them have already in the beginning the same style. So the ballet director doesn't need to work to make them work well together.
Mm-hmm.
Then the academia is not only about singing, playing, and dancing, but it's about all the professions you can do it in a theater. So it's for scenographers, for everything, makeup artists, photographers. It's even about business, about administration.
Yep.
Everything. We have good teachers. This is important, of course.
Yep.
We have, for instance, Luciana D'Intino,
Mm-hmm.
a great
mezzo-soprano.
Yep. Yes, and she's now teaching in the academia. In the past, we had Leila Gencher. So, but what makes the difference really is the connection, is the fact that they can come here, play inside La Scala. The Accademia makes all the performances for children, and they have this special production all for them. But they are, well, the best pupils are also in the big productions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this really makes the difference. The possibility to be closer to the main stage, to breathe the air of the theater, and I think in the end this is the point.
One of the things you mentioned that I think is very important, many schools where I teach, there could be superb musical education and maybe some dramatic education, but there's not the awareness of business or design or every other thing that goes into making an opera production or a ballet. Whereas at La Scala, it's all integrated. And
Yes.
Students, even if they're studying to be a singer, are exposed to the business part of opera, which is it's crucial. And I think very highly of it. I think you know that. Laurentea, am I pronouncing it correctly? I don't know that.
Laurentea, yes. This is
By
a wonderful project by Dominique Meyer.
Yeah.
In the past, we had Baroque performances, we had Baroque operas, but it was mainly hand.
Mm-hmm.
And which is, of course, great, but there's a lot of Handel around.
Yeah.
And we have a responsibility for the Italian repertoire of the Baroque era. And there's a lot of repertoire who is underperformed, and strangely enough, is especially underperformed in Italy.
Yes.
So when I first heard some Cavalli operas, it was in Glyndebourne, not in Italy.
Yeah.
And now we had, so we have a lot of first performances for La Scala. The Laurentea, of course, but
Like
also,
yeah,
La Callisto.
Mm-hmm.
We made a Neapolitan opera this year by Leonardo Vinci, and it works. People likes it, and I think it's a very important. It's the most important contribution by Dominique to the really Italian culture, because it is absurd. It's ridiculous, but Italian theaters do not perform Italian Baroque opera, or very very little.
I know that. And you have one of the greatest stage directors in the world directing not The Ring and not Guillaume Tell. He doesn't like Rossini, so he wouldn't direct Guillaume
Yes,
Tell. Not Verdi. He's doing Robert Carsen is doing Lorentea.
Lorentea. Yes.
Now, how did that happen? I mean, it's kind of like casting Maria Callas as Lucia di Lammermoor, magnificent casting to get Robert Carsen to do Lorentea. How?
Well, I think
It's great.
Robert Carsen did a lot of things. I
Yeah.
think he did 14 operas, 14 productions at La Scala, so a lot. And of course, we adore him. He made an extraordinary Peter Grimes a few weeks ago, which was really incredible because it was so detailed, so precise, so intelligent. We were all really stunned, and we have a project for many years. We want to have him for several productions in the future, and so it's not asking him to do Lorentea, but it's about asking him to do several things, including Lorentea.
Well, I
And,
would love
but
yes.
there is another point, is that I think Baroque opera is such a beautiful thing for a director who has fantasy, who has imagination.
Mhm.
And that's what he showed in his last Giulio Cesare in
Which I loved. I
Milan.
saw that in Milan. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, well, one special thing about Robert Carson is that he he has his style. You can recognize it, and because he is always so sharp, so intelligent, and then suddenly it becomes poetic, and
Mhm.
you do not expect that, and then it's really very very moving. But this style doesn't mean that he does always the same thing.
Correct. Correct.
The different productions by Robert are really different between them,
Yeah.
and I think another Baroque opera is a great occasion for to imagine things for his fantasy.
I had the pleasure a few years ago of having dinner with him in New York with a mutual friend from Barcelona. And we were talking about different operas that I would love to see him direct. And somewhere in the middle of the meal, I said, "You've never done Rossini." He said, "I don't like Rossini." And I put down my fork. I want to be very polite. I am polite, but I wanted to find out why. And I said, "Is there something particular?" He said, "I don't like Rossini." So Dominique Mayer is a genius, and I want to see Dominique Mayer persuade Robert Carsen to direct any Rossini opera that he would do. That's my one request. So then you have De Rosenkavalier, Kirill Petrenko conducting, which is
Yes,
quite a coup. This is the co-production with Salzburg, Krasimira
yes, this is
Stoyanova, who will be a wonderful Marshallin, great cast up and down. And I don't have to say why De Rosenkavalier. It's because it's De Rosenkavalier. But then we have a new ring cycle. You are
yes.
ending your season with the beginning of a new ring cycle, which I find absolutely enticing. Talk about it, please.
Well, we end our season with two great conductors who are both quite busy at the moment.
Yeah.
So it wasn't easy to have Kirill Petrenko. He doesn't do very much around, so it's really something special, and we are very happy about this debut. About Rheingold, we have another great conductor who has a new job. He
Yes.
is yes, he is he is the new music director of the Berlin Opera, the Unter den Linden, and on top of this, he will conduct well other things in Berlin. He will conduct. He will continue conducting in Vienna. He will do something in Bayreuth. So we are especially happy that he decided to give us this time to make an entire new ring cycle.
This being Christian Thielemann.
Yes,
We
yes.
didn't say his name. Yeah.
Oh, okay. He is Christian Thielemann.
Yeah.
And he is a great conductor. The orchestra loves him. And I think he will find a great connection with David McVicker. David McVicker is, well, in my opinion, he is a genius. He has this ability to be classical, not to go against the public, but still having always great ideas. He is always able to say new things without making any scandal, without I'm not against scandals, I have
Yeah.
to say. Sometimes I like to have a little fire in the theater. I think it's part of the enjoyment, and I think it's necessary. But I talked with David about his concept, which is very much, for many years we had political ring cycles who are more or less still songs of Adorno. It's still about the point of
Theodore
view.
Adorno,
Yes, this
not
is
Gabriele
still
Adorno.
yes. There it is always about capitalism,
Yeah.
and it has been a great mine. It has been a great way to read Wagner, but it's not the only one. And David is rather interested in nature, in finding the roots of the myth, in the relationship between man and nature, which is, I must say, not less political than the other one.
Yep.
But maybe in a more actual and deep way.
The relationship of Wagner and nature and the environment has been explored a fair amount in North America. Francesca Zambello did a very famous cycle in Washington and San Francisco. There was another one done in Arizona a number of years ago in the desert, outside in nature, that was rather amazing. It was done with microphones, but apart from that, it was a very interesting thing. To me, the ring is always worth exploring. You do know, Paolo, where the first notes were composed of the ring cycle?
Sorry?
Do you know where the first music of the ring cycle was composed? I can tell you.
Ravello?
In Liguria.
In Liguria?
Yeah. And the reason was that Wagner was sailing from Genova
Not
to La
Ravello,
Spezia.
Rapallo.
No, but it was actually in La Spezia.
In La Spezia.
We know exactly where he composed because he documented everything. He was sailing from Genova to La Spezia. There was a storm. He got seasick. he was taken off the boat in La Spezia and taken to one of the main streets. I remember the street address is number 145 of that street. And he laid in a bed in a sort of an osteria, and his head was swirling. And then suddenly the great E flat chord came to him, and he got up out of his bed and began composing the first music of Das Rheingold in La Spezia. So again, Italy inspires everyone and everything. I want to just add that for people can go online, is it Teatro alla Scala.it or .org? Which one is it?
ORG.
ORG. Okay. And you and I can talk.
But if you Google it, you can just Google it.
There's so much more than what we covered, but I just point this out because it gave me the opportunity to do a snapshot of La Scala today as you start your season with someone who speaks about it so well. My final question for you is, if Maria Callas, at the age of 100 years old tomorrow, walked into Teatro alla Scala today, what would she say?
I think she would still stay, I feel home.
Okay. I agree with you completely. So, Paolo Besana, this has been a wonderful conversation. I thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've introduced listeners to aspects of Maria Callas they probably didn't know. And I'm always happy for people to understand the reality of certain theaters that don't necessarily comport with the reputation. The reputation is great, but we don't know La Scala in all of its complexity, and it's a wonderfully fascinating, complex place. And I know you're going to have a fantastic opening night. So
thank you.
Ti ringrazio, as the Italians say.
Grazie.
And I hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred.